The dusty winds of Redemption Creek, Wyoming territory carried more than just the scent of sage and cottonwood on that sweltering July afternoon in 1876. They carried change. Catherine Hayes stood motionless on the weathered porch of the general store, her black morning dress collecting a fine layer of trail dust as the stagecoach that had delivered her rattled away. Her gloved hand clutched a crumpled letter, the last connection to a brother she hadn't seen in 15 years, now gone from this world like her husband 6 months prior. "Madam, you planning on standing there till sundown?" The gruff voice startled her from her thoughts. Catherine turned to find a tall man watching her with curious green eyes. His weathered face spoke of years under the harsh western sun, but there was a gentleness in his expression that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. "I'm afraid I'm a bit lost," she admitted, her Boston accent immediately marking her as an outsider. "I'm looking for the Hayes property." The man's eyebrows rose slightly. "You're Thomas Hayes' kin, his sister." Her throat tightened, "though I'm too late to see him, it seems." The stranger removed his hat, revealing sun-bleached brown hair. "Garrett Kincaid, madam. I worked your brother's land with him. I'm mighty sorry for your loss." Catherine nodded, unsure what to say. Thomas had written of a ranch hand who'd become like family to him, but she hadn't expected to meet him so soon after arriving. "I've come to settle his affairs," she explained. "I don't intend to stay long." Garrett replaced his hat, squinting toward the setting sun. "It'll be dark soon." "Best I take you out to the ranch now. Town's no place for a lady alone." Catherine wanted to object. She'd managed alone in Boston since Edward's passing, but the foreign landscape and curious stares from locals convinced her to accept his offer. "My wagon's just down the way," he said, reaching for her trunk. As they rode away from town, Catherine studied the man beside her. His hands were calloused but steady on the reins, his profile strong against the orange glow of sunset. Something about him stirred a feeling she thought had died with Edward. "How long did you work for my brother?" she asked, needing to break the silence. "Going on 5 years now," Garrett replied. "Started as hired help, but Tom made me foreman last year. Said he was getting too old to run things proper. He never mentioned he was ill in his letters." Garrett's jaw tightened. Tom wasn't one to burden others with his troubles. The consumption took him quick in the end. Catherine turned away, blinking back tears. "Another family member gone without a proper goodbye. He spoke of you often," Garrett offered softly. "Kept your letters in a box by his bed, read them over and over." The thought brought both comfort and pain. Thomas had left Boston after a bitter argument with their father, barely 19 and determined to make his own way. Pride had kept them separated all these years, though their letters had maintained a tenuous connection. As twilight deepened, the wagon crested a hill, revealing a modest ranch nestled in a valley below. A 2-story house stood proudly alongside a barn and corral, surrounded by rolling grassland that stretched toward distant mountains. "It's beautiful," Catherine whispered, surprised by the emotion in her voice. "Tom built most of it himself," Garrett said with unmistakable pride. "Started with nothing but that small cabin there." He pointed to a structure near a stand of cottonwoods. "Now it's one of the finest small spreads in the territory." The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the main house. Before Catherine could move, Garrett was beside her, offering his hand. She hesitated only briefly before accepting his assistance, feeling the strength in his grip as he helped her down. "I've been staying in the bunkhouse since Tom passed," he explained, carrying her trunk to the porch. "Kept the house ready, though, figured someone would come eventually." Catherine followed him inside, overwhelmed by the scent of wood smoke and leather so different from her Boston home, yet somehow familiar. Oil lamps cast a warm glow over simple but well-crafted furniture. A bookshelf held volumes of poetry alongside practical farming manuals. Thomas's presence lingered in every corner. "I'll bring in firewood and get you settled," Garrett said, setting down her trunk. "Cook left some stew warming. You must be hungry after your journey." Before she could thank him, he was gone, leaving Catherine alone with the ghosts of her brother's life. Over the next few days, Catherine found herself immersed in Thomas's affairs. His will was straightforward: the ranch and all its holdings now belonged to her. It was more responsibility than she'd anticipated, and entirely foreign to her experience as a schoolteacher's wife in Boston. Garrett proved invaluable, patiently explaining the ranch operations each morning as they walked the property. There were 20 head of cattle, 6 horses, a vegetable garden, and endless maintenance tasks. 2 ranch hands, Miguel and Jeremiah, handled most of the physical labor, but it was clear that Garrett was the driving force keeping everything functioning. On her 4th morning, Catherine found Garrett mending a fence near the corral. She watched unnoticed for a moment as he worked, admiring the efficient way he moved. "Mr. Kincaid," she called, approaching with a tray. "I thought you might want some coffee." He looked up, surprise and something else flickering in his eyes. "That's mighty kind, Mrs. Hayes. Please call me Catherine." She set the tray on a nearby stump. "I've been thinking about the ranch." Garrett wiped his hands on a bandana before accepting the offered cup. "Have you decided when you'll be heading back east?" "That's what I wanted to discuss." Catherine took a deep breath. "I'm considering selling the property." His expression remained neutral, but she noticed how his knuckles whitened around the cup. "It's your right, of course." "I know nothing about ranching," she continued, "and my life is in Boston." "Tom built something special here," Garrett said quietly, "but I understand you have your own life." Something in his tone made Catherine feel defensive. "What would you have me do, Mr. Kincaid?" "Stay and pretend I belong in this wild place." His eyes met hers directly. "Nobody belongs anywhere at first, Mrs. Hayes. Belonging is something you build, like Tom built this ranch." Before she could respond, Miguel rode up with news of a problem at the north pasture. Garrett excused himself, leaving Catherine with her thoughts and cooling coffee. That evening, Catherine found herself unable to sleep. The house creaked and settled around her, the silence of the prairie broken only by coyotes calling in the distance. On impulse, she lit a lamp and made her way to Thomas's study. A sturdy desk dominated the room, its surface organized with ledgers and correspondence. She sat in her brother's chair, running her fingers over the worn leather blotter. The drawers yielded more practical papers: deeds, bank documents, receipts, until she found a small wooden box tucked in the back of the bottom drawer. Inside lay bundles of letters tied with string, her letters, saved carefully over 15 years. Beneath them was a daguerreotype she recognized, their family portrait, taken when Catherine was 12 and Thomas 16. Their parents stood stiffly behind them, faces solemn as was proper for photographs. But Thomas had his hand on Catherine's shoulder, a barely perceptible smile on his young face. Tears blurred her vision as she returned the photograph to its place. As she closed the box, something fell from between the letters, a folded newspaper clipping announcing Edward's death 6 months ago. Thomas had known, had perhaps been planning to write or even visit when his own illness overtook him. Catherine wept then, not only for her brother but for the lost years and missed opportunities. Morning found her still at the desk, awakened by the sounds of the ranch coming to life. She washed her face and changed quickly, determined to speak with Garrett before she lost her nerve. She found him in the barn, saddling a horse for the day's work. "Mr. Kincaid," she began, then corrected herself. "Garrett, I'd like to learn about the ranch." He paused, studying her face. "You've decided to stay." "I've decided to try," she amended. "I owe Thomas that much. Will you teach me?" Something like hope flared in his eyes. "It won't be easy. Ranch life is nothing like Boston." "I'm aware," she said, lifting her chin, "but I'm not afraid of hard work." The smile that spread across his face caused an unexpected flutter in her chest. "Then we'll start today." The following weeks transformed Catherine in ways she couldn't have imagined. Her pale hands grew calloused, her skin tanned despite her bonnet. She learned to collect eggs without disturbing the hens, to identify which calves belonged to which cows, to recognize the signs of approaching weather in the clouds and wind. Each evening, exhausted but oddly satisfied, she would join Garrett on the porch. Their conversations began with ranch matters but gradually expanded to include their pasts, their dreams, their losses. He spoke of coming west after the war, of finding purpose in the untamed landscape. She shared stories of teaching alongside Edward, of the fever that had taken him, of her childless marriage that had been companionable if not passionate. Edward was a good man, she told Garrett one evening as they watched lightning play across distant clouds. He would have wanted me to find happiness again. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. And have you found happiness here? The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken possibilities. I'm finding something, she admitted. Purpose, perhaps. A connection to Thomas I never expected. Your brother loved this land, Garrett said, but he loved you more, kept every letter you sent him. I found them, Catherine nodded. Along with the notice of Edward's death, he knew I was alone. He wanted to bring you here, Garrett revealed, was making plans when he took ill. Said his stubborn little sister shouldn't be alone in that cold Boston house. The thought of Thomas planning for her future while facing his own mortality brought fresh tears. I wish I'd come sooner. You're here now, Garrett said simply. That's what matters. August brought a heat wave that turned the land golden and brittle. Catherine adapted to the new rhythm of ranch life, rising before dawn to complete chores before the worst of the day's heat. She surprised herself by finding joy in physical labor, in watching seeds she planted push through soil, in the satisfaction of a well-organized larder. The ranch began to feel less like Thomas's legacy and more like her own future. She added her feminine touch to the house curtains sewn from ordered fabric, wildflowers arranged in mason jars, a proper vegetable garden planned for next spring. She found herself making long-term plans without realizing it. Garrett noticed the changes too. Place hasn't looked this alive since Tom was well, he commented one evening as they shared supper on the porch to catch the evening breeze. It needed a woman's touch, Catherine replied with a small smile. Not just any woman, Garrett said, his voice low. You've brought something special here, Catherine. The way he said her name made her pulse quicken. Their eyes met across the table, and for a breathless moment, Catherine thought he might reach for her hand. Instead, he cleared his throat and rose to collect their plates. Town dance is Saturday, he said casually, though she detected nervousness in his tone. Thought you might like to go, meet some of the neighbors proper like. Catherine hadn't attended any social functions since arriving. I'm still in mourning, she reminded him, touching the black ribbon at her collar. It's been over 7 months for your husband, Garrett pointed out gently. And folks here understand about Tom, no one would think ill of you. The prospect of music and dancing after so much solitude was tempting. Would you accompany me? His smile was answer enough. Saturday arrived with a flurry of preparation. Catherine found herself fussing with her appearance more than she had in months, finally settling on a dove-gray dress with subtle black trim respectful of her mourning while acknowledging its waning period. When Garrett arrived at the main house to escort her, Catherine barely recognized him. Gone were the worn work clothes, replaced by a clean black suit and polished boots. His hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. You look beautiful, he said, eyes widening as she descended the stairs. Catherine felt a blush rise to her cheeks. Thank you, you're quite handsome yourself. The ride to town was filled with a nervous energy neither acknowledged. The schoolhouse where the dance was held glowed with lantern light, fiddle music spilling into the summer evening. Inside, Catherine found herself warmly welcomed by the community. Women who had nodded politely in the general store now invited her to join their conversation circles. Men who tipped their hats from a distance approached to offer condolences for Thomas and inquire about the ranch. Throughout the evening, Garrett remained attentive but not possessive, introducing her to neighbors and friends. Catherine observed how respected he was, how easily he moved through this society that had once seemed so foreign to her. When the fiddlers struck up a waltz, Garrett appeared at her side. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Hayes?" The formality made her smile. "You may, Mr. Kincaid." His hand at her waist was warm and steady as he guided her into the dance. Catherine had always considered herself a competent dancer, but Garrett surprised her with his grace. "Where did a cowboy learn to waltz?" she asked as they moved smoothly around the floor. "My mother insisted all her sons learn proper manners," he replied with a grin. "Said no son of hers would embarrass a lady on the dance floor. She taught you well." His expression softened. "She'd have liked you, said a woman with spirit was worth 10 docile ones." As they continued to dance, the room seemed to fade around them. Catherine was acutely aware of his hand at her waist, the clean scent of his shaving soap, the way his eyes never left her face. "People are watching us," she murmured, noticing the interested glances. "Let them," Garrett replied, his voice husky. "I'm dancing with the most beautiful woman here." The compliment should have scandalized her, but instead, it sent a pleasant warmth through her body. For the first time since arriving in Wyoming, Catherine felt truly seen not as Thomas's sister or Edward's widow, but as herself. As summer faded into autumn, Catherine and Garrett fell into a comfortable routine. Mornings were for ranch work, afternoons for Catherine's projects around the house, evenings for shared meals and conversation. They attended church together on Sundays, visited neighbors, and made plans for winter preparations. To the community, they appeared as business partners, the Eastern widow and her foreman running the Hayes Ranch together. But privately, Catherine acknowledged that her feelings had grown far beyond professional respect. She found herself watching Garrett when he wasn't looking the way sunlight caught his profile as he worked, how his hands moved confidently over tools and animals, the rare but transformative smile that appeared when something pleased him. She memorized the sound of his laughter, treasured the moments their hands accidentally touched, dreamed of more. Yet neither of them crossed the invisible line between friendship and courtship. Catherine sensed Garrett was giving her time, respecting her mourning period and adjustment to ranch life. His restraint was both frustrating and endearing. Everything changed on a crisp October afternoon when Catherine rode out alone to gather the last of the season's wild berries. The sky had been threatening rain all day, but she was determined to complete her preserving before winter set in. The storm arrived with unexpected fury, turning the trail into mud within minutes. Catherine's horse spooked at a lightning strike, rearing suddenly. She fought to control the animal, but a second bolt sent it bolting across the open meadow. Catherine clung desperately to the saddle until a low-hanging branch caught her shoulder, sweeping her to the ground. Pain exploded through her left side as she landed hard. Dazed and soaked, she watched her horse disappear into the downpour. Catherine struggled to her feet, assessing the damage: bruised ribs certainly, possibly sprained wrist, but nothing broken. The ranch was at least 3 miles away and the rain showed no signs of stopping. She began walking, each step painful but necessary. The temperature dropped as evening approached, her wet clothing offering little protection against the wind. Catherine's thoughts turned to Garrett. Would he realize she was missing? Would he come looking for her in this weather? An hour into her journey, Catherine heard hoofbeats approaching through the rain. Relief flooded her as Garrett appeared, his face etched with worry. "Catherine," he was off his horse in an instant, reaching for her with shaking hands. "Are you hurt? Miguel found your horse at the north pasture." "Nothing serious," she assured him, though her teeth chattered with cold. "Just foolish. I should have headed back sooner." Garrett shrugged out of his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. His hands lingered, drawing her closer. "I thought," his voice broke, "when I saw your horse without you." Something in his expression made Catherine's heart race. "You were worried about me." Worried doesn't begin to cover it. His hands framed her face, thumbs gently wiping rain from her cheeks. "I can't lose you, Catherine." The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Catherine reached up to touch his face, permission and invitation in her touch. "You won't lose me," she whispered. "I'm right here." Garrett's kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with months of unspoken longing. Catherine responded with equal fervor, arms winding around his neck, the pain in her side forgotten as she pressed closer. When they finally parted, both breathless, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the first day you arrived." Catherine smiled, feeling lighter despite her sodden clothes and aching body. "What took you so long, Cowboy?" His laugh warmed her more than any coat could. "Respect, patience, fear you'd run back to Boston if I scared you off." "I'm not running anywhere," she promised. "This is where I belong now." Garrett helped her onto his horse, mounting behind her and holding her securely against his chest for the ride home. By the time they reached the ranch, the rain had stopped and stars glimmered between scattered clouds. Miguel and Jeremiah looked relieved when they arrived, taking charge of the horse while Garrett escorted Catherine inside. He built up the fire while she changed into dry clothes, returning to find him preparing hot tea in the kitchen. "You should see a doctor tomorrow," he insisted, handing her a steaming cup. "Those ribs might be worse than you think." "I've had worse falls teaching city children to ice skate," she assured him, though she winced as she sat. "But I'll go if it makes you feel better." Garrett pulled his chair closer to hers. "I meant what I said out there, Catherine. I can't imagine this place my life without you now." She reached for his hand, twining their fingers together. "When I first arrived, I felt so out of place, a Boston widow with no business trying to run a ranch. And now," Catherine smiled, "now I can't imagine being anywhere else with anyone else." Garrett raised their joined hands to his lips. "I love you, Catherine Hayes, have almost since you stepped off that stagecoach." The words she'd been waiting to hear, perhaps longer than she'd admitted to herself. "I love you too, Garrett Kincaid." He kissed her again, tender and reverent before pulling back with visible reluctance. "You need rest. Doctor first thing tomorrow," Catherine laughed. "Always so practical." "One of us has to be," he teased, helping her to her feet. "Because I'm thinking very impractical thoughts right now." Heat rose to her cheeks. "Perhaps those thoughts could wait until after the doctor visit." His smile held promise. "I've waited this long. I can wait a bit longer." The town doctor confirmed bruised ribs and prescribed rest, which Garrett enforced with devoted attention. He moved his things into the main house, sleeping on the sofa despite Catherine's protests, and handled ranch duties while ensuring she followed the doctor's orders. Their courtship progressed with the same honesty that had characterized their friendship. They spoke openly about their pasts, their hopes for the future, and their growing feelings. Garrett was patient with Catherine's occasional hesitations, understanding that moving from widowhood to new love required emotional adjustments. By Thanksgiving, Catherine felt strong enough to host dinner for their ranch hands and several neighboring families. As she watched Garrett carve the turkey at the head of the table, she was struck by how natural it felt, this man in her home, in her life, in her heart. Later that evening, after their guests had departed, they sat before the fire. Catherine's head rested on Garrett's shoulder, his arm wrapped comfortably around her. "I have something to ask you," he said, his voice unusually serious. Catherine sat up, noting the nervous tension in his posture. "What is it?" Garrett shifted to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. "It was my mother's. I'd be honored if you'd wear it." Catherine's breath caught. "Garrett, I know it's not been a year since Edward passed," he continued quickly. "And if you need more time, I understand. But I want you to know my intentions. I want to build a life with you here, continue what Thomas started, make this ranch into something we can be proud of together." Tears blurred Catherine's vision as she looked at the ring, then at the man offering it. "I don't need more time. I know exactly where I belong now." "And where's that?" he asked, hope evident in his voice. Catherine smiled through her tears. "With you." Garrett slipped the ring onto her finger, his own hands trembling slightly. "You've made me the happiest man in the territory." Their wedding took place on Christmas Eve in the small church in Redemption Creek. Snow had fallen the night before, transforming the landscape into a glistening wonderland. Catherine wore a dress of deep blue velvet, having set aside her mourning clothes the week before. Garrett waited at the altar in a new suit, his face lighting up as she walked toward him on Miguel's arm. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, their vows spoken with conviction born of genuine understanding and love. The community celebrated with them, the schoolhouse decorated with pine boughs and candles for the reception that followed. As they danced their first waltz as husband and wife, Garrett held Catherine closer than propriety might dictate. "Happy Mrs. Kincaid," he murmured against her ear. The new name sent a thrill through her. "Happier than I ever imagined possible when I stepped off that stagecoach. I knew you belonged here," he said, spinning her gently. From that very first day, Catherine laughed, remembering their early conversations. "As I recall, I insisted rather firmly that I didn't belong." Garrett's smile was tender as he drew her close again. "And what did I tell you?" She rested her head against his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her cheek. "You said I belonged with you." "Smartest thing I ever said," he whispered, pressing a kiss to her hair. As midnight approached, they slipped away from the celebration, returning to the ranch that was now truly their home. Snow began falling again as Garrett carried Catherine across the threshold, both of them laughing as he nearly slipped on the porch steps. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming, a fire blazing in the hearth. Catherine looked around at the home she had come to love, at the man who had helped her find her place in this wild, beautiful land. "What are you thinking?" Garrett asked, coming to stand behind her, arms encircling her waist. Catherine leaned back against his chest, savoring the strength and warmth of him. "I'm thinking about journeys, how sometimes the place you never expected to be is exactly where you're meant to end up." Garrett turned her in his arms, his expression serious. "I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret your journey here." "I already don't," she assured him, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "This is where I was always meant to be. It just took me a while to find my way home." Spring came early to Redemption Creek in 1877. The Hayes Kincaid Ranch flourished under their joint stewardship, expanding its cattle operation and adding a small apple orchard Catherine had always dreamed of planting. Their partnership proved as successful in business as it was in marriage, each contributing their strengths to build something neither could have created alone. On a warm May morning, Catherine stood on the porch watching Garrett work with a new colt in the corral. His patience with the spirited animal reminded her of his patience with her when she'd first arrived, giving her space to find her footing, supporting without controlling, believing in her capabilities before she recognized them herself. As if sensing her thoughts, Garrett looked up and smiled, that special smile reserved only for her. Catherine returned it, her hand resting unconsciously on her stomach where their first child had just begun to make its presence known, news she planned to share with him that evening. The Wyoming wind carried the scent of sage and promise as Catherine descended the porch steps to join her husband. The path that had once seemed so foreign now felt like the only one she was ever meant to walk, a path that had led her not just to a place, but to belonging.